The more one listens to Igbo native music, the more one is conscious of its vital power. It touches the chords of man's inmost being and stirs his primal instincts. It is intensely passionate, and no great effort of the imagination is required to realize that such music could only have originated with the son of Cain.
In the most surprising and eye-opening chapter of the 1921 book Among the Ibos of Nigeria, the author, George Thomas Basden, writing about Igbo music more than 100 years ago, declared that the Igbo people have an innate talent and affinity for music and stirred up some controversy. Unlike the rest of the book, Basden wrote about Igbo music and artists with great enthusiasm and poetic emotion. In my last video, I argued that Among the Ibos of Nigeria by G.T. Basden is one of the most important books ever written about the Igbo people. That despite its colonial perspective, it remains one of the earliest and most detailed eyewitness accounts of traditional Igbo society before the intrusion of colonialism. In this video, let's look at one of the book's most remarkable chapters, the chapter on music. This chapter discloses something that is generally overlooked: the deep musical culture of the Igbo people. Basden was struck by both the skill of Igbo musicians and the richness of their musical traditions. When describing how Igbo singers could capture the mind of the listener, he wrote that,
"Even the European, if he has within him the feeblest susceptibility to music, is liable to find the elemental forces of his nature strangely stirred by the passionate fervor of the musicians."
The chapter also contains one of the earliest and most detailed descriptions of traditional Igbo musical instruments, singing, rhythm, and even how the instruments are played, for example.
The instrument is held like the oboe, but the method of playing is different. The thumbs lightly twanging the strings, the left and right working an equal number of them. It has rather a sweet sound, not unlike light staccato notes from a violin.
Basden noted the esteem with which the musicians were held in the community.
Instrumental soloists of any reputation, especially performers on the auja and ekwe, are treated with great respect. Their services are in demand, and their reward is generally liberal. Talent is recognized, and many artistes become very popular. The leader of a chorus is accorded much the same honor amongst the Ibos as that granted to the minstrel in ancient days in England.
Although Basden oftentimes wrote through the lens of a European missionary in the colonial era, his careful observations preserve valuable details that might otherwise be lost. This delightful chapter gives us a rare glimpse into the musical talent, creativity, and cultural richness of ancient Igboland. For more about Basden and his book, check out my last video. Now lean back and enjoy from the audiobook of Among the Ibos of Nigeria, the chapter titled Music.
Whether the Igbo people trace their ancestry back to Jubal Cain, it is not my purpose to discuss, but they certainly have inherited a fair share of the art originated by the father of music. How long they have been performers upon the instruments now in use, and who invented them, are questions to which answers are not forthcoming. As the people of the interior have never, until very recent times, had any intercourse with the civilized world, we conclude that their musical proclivities, their instruments, and their songs remain practically as they existed in primitive times, or at any rate that they have developed spontaneously. On investigation, we find a small number of wind and string instruments. These are all crude in form, but constant practice is demanded to master them. To compensate for the lack of mechanical contrivances, greater skill is needed. The simplest and most primitive instrument is the ujane, a kind of whistle. It is made of baked clay, in shape round, and about the size of a billiard ball. A substitute is occasionally used, cut from a piece of ukpadi wood. It has two holes, one at the top which serves as the mouthpiece, the other at the front for measuring and varying the piped notes. I first met with it during the war between the Unkpo and Ogidi peoples, where it was used for signalling purposes. The notes, which are produced by blowing through the upper hole, piccolo fashion, are shrill and piercing. The men on outpost duty, perched in trees, sounded the alarm and communicated messages by means of these little instruments. The custom of transmitting signals by sounds is a common one, and is not confined to these whistles. The chiefs entitled to carry ivory horns send out messages by powerful blasts of dot and dash Morse notes. The horns are blown flute-wise, and the note can be varied in length, but not in tone. The chiefs are adept in the art of trumpeting on the horns, and use them for communicating quite long messages. More often they perform upon them purely for display, especially in assemblies, and the din created by half a dozen chiefs in full blast is deafening. A big supply of breath is required, but a satisfactory result depends entirely on the use of the lips. Other methods of spreading information are practiced, notably by the beating of tom-toms, of which more will be said later, and by simply whistling with the lips. Men can communicate with one another quite freely by this method when completely out of speaking range. Boys early find out how to prepare whistles from grass stems, and some of the youths can imitate bugle calls in a very clever manner by blowing down the hollow stalks of a freshly cut pawpaw leaf. Besides these, I know of but one other wind instrument, the auja, a reed some 6 inches in length, furnished with 3 holes for fingering, one in front, one at the back for the thumb, and the bottom outlet. It is always used in assemblies of men, especially when a big piece of work is in progress. The instrumentalist sits down on one side and blows vigorously through the pipe. The tones are shrill and piercing, and at times peculiarly trying to the nerves. It is supposed to instill energy into the labourers and help them to forget the burden of their task, and the effect is similar to that of bagpipes. It undoubtedly does make a difference, and natives work much better when inspired by its sounds. Europeans soon develop murderous tendencies if forced to stay long in the neighbourhood of an auja enthusiast. The native, of course, recognizes the air, but the foreigner would be equally pleased and driven to desperation were he condemned to a steam siren in charge of a mad locomotive driver. The mention of tom-toms at once conjures up the picture of the savage in all his war paint. But this is a false impression. They are not exactly brain-soothing instruments, any more than drums would be were they the only instruments composing a military band. Yet the Igbo tom-tom is not such an ear-splitting contrivance as the drums of an Orange lodge. So far as my experience goes, County Armagh still retains the leading place in drum beating. For one thing, the tom-toms are mostly nothing but hollow blocks of wood. The sound carries a long distance in a country where there is no vehicular traffic and no roar of industry to deaden it. The big tom-toms, ekwe, are not intended to be instruments of music, but are used chiefly for spreading information for certain ceremonial purposes and at sacrificial festivals. Meetings are called by their use and various announcements proclaimed. An ekwe is in great request when a man proceeds to the highest titular degree. On completion of all the business connected with the taking of the Orzor title, the fact is communicated by beating the tom-tom. The smaller tom-toms may be of similar pattern, or they may be wooden cylinders with skin stretched over one end, the most prized, and now rather rare, being those covered with human skin. In the old days, it was not uncommon for human victims to be flayed alive and their skins converted into drum heads. Some of the drums are of smaller pattern. They are distinguished from the ekwe and are technically known as ufe. Steady application for a long period is in order to become a qualified performer on these. The performer must know his instrument thoroughly and be able to gauge the differences in sound to be extracted from the whole top surface of the drum. Each square inch around the slotted opening in the cylinder has its own peculiar note, and these notes are further supplemented by fingering. Often 2 drums are used simultaneously, and the hands cross and recross like those of a cavalry drummer. Hence, although to the European, tom-toms are apt to become monotonous and wearisome, yet it must be allowed that the native exponent exhibits great skill in beating his tattoo upon it. To him, indeed, the beating of the instrument is always significant. Something is conveyed to the native mind which is utterly incomprehensible to the European, and our inability to grasp that meaning in no way detracts from the importance of the drum in every Igbo function. Many of the ekwe are of huge size, particularly those which form part of the municipal regalia, and some have romantic histories attached to them. There is such a one at a town called Umu-Nze. On one of our journeys, we had trekked across country and passed through the outlying parts of the town until we reached the marketplace. In the center there is what, at first sight, appears to be a house, but on closer examination we found it was a shelter built over an immense tom-tom. It was sufficiently interesting to induce me to measure it. The dimensions are as follows: length of actual drum cylinder 5 feet 8 inches, extended ornamental ends each 2 feet 3 inches, length overall 10 feet 2 inches, height 8 feet 5 inches, width 7 feet 10 inches. It is hewn from a single block of uroko wood, but it now shows distinct signs of age and use. Local tradition affirms that this tom-tom was the work of a man from the town of Amaubia. He had earned a great reputation by drum making, and his services were therefore sought by the Umu-Nze people. He was promised a very large fee on condition that he produced a larger drum than any possessed by other towns in the district. He undertook the task, and the tom-tom duly appeared, and was at once the object of intense pride to the people of Umu-Nze. Then arose the disturbing thought, what if a rival town contracted with the maker for a yet bigger drum? Horrors! In such case, the glory of Umu-Nze would speedily depart, and the pride of the people be humbled to the dust. This was altogether too serious a prospect to contemplate, and drastic steps had to be taken to prevent such a catastrophe. Hence it came about that the maker of the wonderful tom-tom was paid his price, and allowed to leave for home well satisfied with his handiwork and its reward. His satisfaction was short-lived, for he had hardly got clear of the town when he was waylaid, led back to the marketplace, and then and there sacrificed. His own blood shed to dedicate that which his hand had wrought. All town tom-toms are consecrated, and consequently regarded as sacred things. and it was customary to sprinkle the blood of a human sacrifice upon them before they were ceremonially beaten. The ubor is an instrument which cannot be compared with any foreign one with which I am acquainted. It is composed of thin pieces of a very soft wood, okwe, and in shape resembles an oblong box. It is from 5 to 15 inches long, from 4 to 6 inches wide, and from 1 to 2 inches deep. Thus far, it is similar in principle to a violin, but in lieu of strings, thin strips of ophalor are used. These are fixed at the tail end and then pass over a low bridge to which they are also bound. The loose ends are cut to different lengths and separated widely enough to permit freedom in fingering. The instrument is held in both hands, with the tailpiece pointing away from the person, and the thumbs are used for manipulating the strips of bamboo. The thumbs press cleanly on the strips and are then slipped sharply backwards, and a twanging sound results, the notes varying according to the different lengths of the 6 or 8 keys of the instrument. Occasionally, loosely threaded cowrie shells are attached to the tail end of the ubor, which are shaken to make an accompaniment. The music is not unpleasant, but there is little life in it, the bamboo strips producing a dull note. One notices young men leisurely parading the streets strumming these instruments, but they are not in demand at assemblies. Indeed, they could not be heard. The ubor is eminently a solo instrument. Probably the most interesting of the Igbo instruments is the ubor akwala, a sort of primitive guitar, or is it the original of the nigger banjo? It has a triangular shape formed by sewing together 3 pieces of soft wood with fibre. To the underpart, from 4 to 8 pliable canes of different lengths are securely laced, all of them extending well beyond the head of the instrument. They are then bent upwards, and the strings are tied to the ends, crossed over the bridge, and finally fastened to the tailpiece. The strings, ormi, are pieces of fibre taken from the base of the palm tree and carefully rubbed down to the required fineness. The instrument is held like the ubor, but the method of playing is different, the thumbs lightly twanging the strings, the left and right working an equal number of them. It has rather a sweet sound, not unlike light staccato notes from a violin. The instrument is tuned by bending the canes and passing the strings 1 or more times round them until the desired pitch is secured. The musician must learn all tunes by ear or compose his own, which he frequently does. The ubor akwala is the favorite instrument for accompanying songs and chants, and is particularly favored by strolling singers at night. One is often awakened by the pleasant strains of a party of musicians on their rounds. Instrumental soloists of any reputation, especially performers on the orja and ekwe, are treated with great respect. Their services are in demand, and their reward is generally liberal. Talent is recognized, and many artistes become very popular. From a musical point of view, one is inclined to think that the native singing is more fascinating than the instrumental music. It is doubtful whether there are any songs, but there are a great number of established refrains and recitatives. The leader of a chorus is accorded much the same honor amongst the Ibos as that granted to the minstrel in ancient days in England. He must possess not only the musical gift, but the instinct also. He creates his theme as the song proceeds, and great ingenuity is displayed in fitting words to time and tune on the spur of the moment. Any unusual incident is seized upon and utilized as material by the leader, And when this fails, he has recourse to the retelling, in song, the exploits of old. Couplets appear to be most in favor with the Igbos, the leader chanting 2 lines as a solo, and the full company joining in with a double-lined chorus. Occasionally, one hears a 4-lined song without solo or chorus, and there are a number of songs intended to be sung as solos. The last mentioned are the only ones for which the natural voice is used. For all chorus work, a falsetto voice is assumed. So accustomed do men become to the practice of using their voices in this manner that with many it develops into a confirmed habit, and they adopt this artificial high-pitched key in conversation. This is very objectionable, but the singing, in contrast, is at times very fine. The best entertainments take place on the darkest nights. On moonlight nights, dancing usually supersedes all other forms of amusement. In the darkness, where none of the party can see the leader, the most perfect time and tune are maintained. The members of the party may be few or many, but the voices of all rise and fall as of one man. No individual voice can be distinguished above the rest. There is not a fraction of time lost at the beginning of a passage, nor is there the slightest sign of dragging at its close. It is fascinating listening to such a party, and the foreigner is astonished at the precision with which the men sing. They never need speeding up or slowing down, but render the whole selection perfectly, each man familiar with his part and able to perform it independently of a conductor. To be able to start a native chant is a most useful accomplishment, and if an opportune moment be seized when some irksome labor is in progress, it will lead to more than ordinary effort on the part of workmen. When canoeing, it is extremely helpful, and paddles which have been inclined to lag quickly liven up to the strains of music. It is amusing to watch the effect of a song upon a crew. At first, it makes no apparent change in the situation. Then, gradually, chatting ceases, and one here and there begins to hum the tune. Within a short time, the song grips the men, and at once the paddles begin to strike in tune with the rhythm, and a good stretch of water will be covered without conscious effort on the part of the men. The only attempts to introduce European ideas of music amongst the Igbos have been made by missionaries, with what success is mainly a matter of opinion. That there is an inherent love and instinct for music there can be no question. The native boy will quickly pick out tunes by ear on any instrument, and there is no doubt that some would well repay proper instruction, as in the case of other West Africans. Up to the present, English hymn tunes and chants set to translations are apt to be treated mechanically. The singing is not lacking in volume, far from it, but the living and soul-stirring effect engendered by the native songs is practically lacking in the translated productions. There is never the same spirit of abandonment in the foreign article as in the native one. European music, as they interpret it, has not yet succeeded in gaining access to the inner being of the Igbo. It may have the form of music, but it lacks the essence. He will sing hymns as continuously as formerly he chanted native lyrics, but he is never carried away by them, however much he may enjoy singing. With English music, volume is the one object in view, and congregational singing in the larger churches in the Igbo country is like the thunder of many waters. The more one listens to native music, the more one is conscious of its vital power. It touches the chords of man's inmost being and stirs his primal instincts. It demands the performer's whole attention and so sways the individual as almost to divide asunder, for the time being, mind and body. It is intensely passionate, and no great effort of the imagination is required to realize that such music could only have originated with the son of Cain. Under its influence, and that of the accompanying dance, one has seen men and women pass into a completely dazed condition, oblivious and apparently unconscious of the world around them. Both sexes are drawn under its spell and lose themselves in it. It is savage, the instruments are barbaric, but it pulsates with the spirit of the thing in its most potent forms. It lifts men and women out of themselves. It may leave them almost prostrated with exhaustion. It may bring into activity all the baser instincts. The outcome of a full program of song and dance frequently ends in voluptuous debauchery. Even the European, if he has within him the feeblest susceptibility to music, is liable to find the elemental forces of his nature strangely stirred by the passionate fervour of the possessed musicians. What the bagpipes are to the typical Highlander and the drums to an Ulster Orangeman, that, and more, is native music to the Igbo. In each case, the emotions are roused and the pulses quickened, but the native yields himself to its influence with absolute abandon.